Hello everyone. So I know that I've been putting out a lot of videos lately, but this is a question that I have been getting a lot, both in my videos and also in my Discord, and people have been pinging me with these questions. People come into my streams to ask questions like this, and I want to make sure that I can just kind of give my blanket advice in a video so that I can maybe refer people back to this, and hopefully this clears some stuff up for people. Hopefully this, helps out a little bit when it comes to decision making with what you're going to do with the items that you have. Before we really get into this, I want to really emphasize that this is my personal opinion. I am a global only player. I have looked ahead quite a bit, and I have just a lot of experience personally with playing other gacha games that have similar resources that you want to spend very carefully like this. So all of this is to say that this is my personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, I think that's completely valid, and everybody should definitely play the way that they feel is best for them and for their account. Now, that being said, let's talk about the difference between these two items, because I think this is something that is a nuance that is getting missed in a lot of conversations about using these items. So, for the SSR vouchers that we're getting, you can get a card that you have no copies of. But you can only get a card that released prior to when you get the voucher. There's always a cutoff date for the voucher, and you can't get any cards after that have released after that. So if I don't have any copies of Super Creek at all, I could get a copy of Super Creek using the SSR voucher. The same with Fine Motion or like any of the other, big cards that you want to make sure that you can get. The uncap crystal, you must have a copy of the card to uncap it. So you can't just uncap a card that you don't have, because the uncapped crystal kind of adds the limit break to the card that you already possess. And the uncapped crystal can uncap any card in the future as well. So a good idea would be to save a lot of your uncapped crystals if you know that you're going to be wanting to MLB a card later. So for example, if I know that I want to MLB, maybe Mr. CB Wit that comes out later on this year, I will be saving my uncapped crystals just in case I get really unlucky in the gacha and don't get enough copies. That way I can uncap it immediately, and then I'll have the card at MLB right when I want it. Right? Whereas with the SSR voucher, it's retroactive. You can only get cards that released prior to the voucher, which means that the vouchers, if you already have all of like the quote unquote like big three cards MLB, which I would consider to be Fine Motion, Kita-san Black, and Super Creek, then the SSR voucher loses a little bit of value because it doesn't carry forward into the future. So when you're using this SSR voucher, I think that for a very established account that has at least one copy of a lot of the chase cards, the SSR voucher is a little bit less valuable than the uncapped crystals, just because the uncapped crystals you can use them for stronger cards in the future, whereas the SSR vouchers, you would really only be able to use them for stronger cards that have happened in the past. Now, before I get into any more of this, I have one huge blanket rule, and this is, if you take anything out from this video, please take this. Do not use any items to get a card or an LB of a card that you will not immediately use. If you use tickets, crystals, selectors on cards that just sit and collect dust in your account because you're still borrowing an MLB copy of that card, then those items are essentially wasted until you decide to use that card. You always want to keep the ability to enhance a card rather than enhancing a card that does nothing for your account. So do not use any items to get a card or limit break of a card that you are not going to be using that day. Right? If you're not going to be using a card immediately, don't spend resources on it. That is my number one rule. I don't even think that that's a take it as you will rule or anything like that. I think that this rule is something that you should always be using in your account growth. So now let's talk about some cards that people very commonly ask me about. These cards are going to be Super Creek, Fine Motion, Fukukitaru, Top Road. I would even put, Rico in here. Kita-san Black is also kind of applicable here. And I want to talk about getting to an MLB of a card versus getting to 2LB, 3LB, 1LB, okay? Because getting an MLB of a card is very, very strong. And getting that same card to just 1, 2, or even 3LB is not nearly going to be as strong, especially in this current scenario where all of the cards that I have listed here do not hit their 10% race bonus until they are MLB. So if you are asking if you should use your selector tickets to get Super Creek to 2LB, Super Creek at 2LB does not have her 10 race bonus. And so even if you use your resources to get her to 2LB and then you use her in your deck, she's still not going to be nearly as beneficial to your deck as just borrowing a Super Creek. Now, being able to use that 2LB Super Creek in your deck might enable you to borrow a card like Top Road, right? But I don't think that it's really worth spending these resources on, especially these particular cards, if you're not MLBing them. So in particular, the Top Road card does fall off pretty significantly after the Trackblazer scenario, but she is pretty strong for the Trackblazer scenario. So for example, if you manage to get this card at 3LB during your free pulls, maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to spend a resource to get her to MLB, just because the MLB is going to be much stronger through Trackblazer, which is really the point of the game where she is at her strongest. But it is a significant resource, and it's one that maybe you would rather not spend because you're continuously looking forward into the future, and that's completely valid as well. Fukukitaru additionally is very similar, where she is her strongest during Trackblazer, and she is going to not be as strong after Trackblazer ends. So would it be worth to use like a bunch of really rare resources to get Fukukitaru up to MLB? And that kind of thing is more an individual choice, I think, than it is something that I want to make a blanket statement on. I never want to say, don't use this, don't get this card, don't MLB this card, because my goal here is to try to educate people about what ramifications using certain materials on certain cards might have, but not to tell you what to do or what not to do. So let's get into some specific examples, and maybe this can kind of help you flush out what your ideas are in your head. And really, I'm going to give my perspective in my specific scenario. And like I said, everybody's scenarios are different, and additionally, everybody's threshold for what is worth and what is not worth is different. So I have a 0LB Super Creek. I can use my crystal and both of my tickets to get her to 3LB. But to me, the effect of using a 3LB Creek to free up my borrow slot wouldn't significantly improve my deck strength enough to be worth spending literally all 3 of my items on her. She would still just be 3LB, so she wouldn't have her 10% race bonus, and I would be missing out on some additional stats from her just so that I could go off and borrow maybe a Top Road card because I didn't pull Top Road, or, you know, a different card that might benefit my deck a little bit, and it might make my deck strength stronger, especially for this CM11 scenario, but I don't think personally it would make my deck strong enough to warrant using all of these items on this card that I'll probably only be using for this CM, and not in the near future where there will not be very many other CMs that will require this much stamina padding. So example 2. I had a 3LB Fine Motion because I used my half anniversary ticket and a crystal on her. I had her at 1LB, the half anniversary came around, I immediately used both of my items to get her to 3LB. And I did this back then because 3LB Fine Motion was by far my best wit option in Unity. She was the absolute best wit card that I could have had, and it upgraded my deck significantly at that time that I used her in every single deck that I had. My plan was to use an anniversary ticket that we would get here to MLB her, which would allow her to hit the 10% race bonus threshold, so I could kind of bring her into Trackblazer and have her continue to be a permanent slot in my deck. I was very lucky and I was able to pull my last copy of Fine Motion on her recent banner, but I think that if I hadn't done that, I would have used one of my anniversary tickets to MLB her. Because if my Fine Motion was still stuck at 3LB, I might actually use a different card instead. The MLB Marvelous Sunday SR or the MLB Agnes Tachyon SR, they both have 10% race bonus. So if I was at a position where I could upgrade my Fine Motion from, let's say, 0LB to 3LB, or 1LB to 3LB, or 1LB to 2LB, right? I probably wouldn't do that because there are SR cards that I have at MLB that do have a higher race bonus and would therefore be a little bit easier for me to slot into my decks in Trackblazer. So what I'm trying to get at here is that for me personally, the breakpoint for a lot of these cards is MLB. Before Trackblazer, the breakpoint for a lot of these cards was maybe 3LB, right? But now that we are looking very, very hard at race bonus, losing even a little bit of race bonus can make your deck perform significantly worse. And so being able to hit those breakpoints is a lot more important now than it was in the past. And so there's a lot of other cards here, and there's a lot of other cards that are good cards that people ask about, but they're a lot more situational, right? So if you have cards like this at 3LB that you could upgrade to MLB with only one of your resources, right? You can ask yourself, does this card have significant race bonus at MLB? So will it help me during Trackblazer? in the immediate future? Will this card be a permanent deck slot? If I upgrade this card to MLB, am I going to use it often enough to be worth that material that I'm spending on it? Is there something better that I could be saving or using my resources on? Am I going to be planning on pulling for a card that I need MLB later, so I shouldn't use my uncapped crystals on these cards now? Now, if you're looking at cards like this, like Biko or Nice Nature, cards like this, you would probably want to bias towards using your ticket vouchers on them rather than your uncapped crystals, because like I mentioned, your uncapped crystals are going to be stronger moving forward, and your vouchers are only going to be able to pick up cards like this. And what I really want to impress on you guys is that doing nothing is valid. Currently, I am sitting on both of my Selector tickets as well as my uncapped crystal, despite having cards that I could use them on, because I wouldn't use my upgraded cards right this second. Remember, back to my rule, if you're not going to use them right now, don't use items on them. I can still pull the cards that I want between now and when I would maybe want to use them. And I can always use my items on these cards at a crucial time later. So doing nothing is completely valid because that gives me a lot of flexibility moving into the future when I'm looking at other cards that I want. And with all that being said, a bonus consideration here is your perceived lack of deck strength currently burning you out of the game? So I am always an advocate of you need to do what keeps you engaged in the game more than you need to spend resources optimally, or more than you need to min-max everything forever, right? What is the most important is that you continue enjoying the game, you continue having fun, you don't burn yourself out saving, and then like you quit the game before you ever reach the point where you're spending your items. Like that is the absolute worst case scenario, and you want to avoid that at all costs. So in my opinion, it can be worth it to spend resources if you will actually use the cards, even if that expenditure is suboptimal. Staying engaged in the game should be your number one priority, and if that means that you're going to spend these resources now in a suboptimal way, I think that's completely valid, and I think that's what you should do if you're at a point where you are really lamenting your lack of deck strength. I do want to suggest that you try to make sure that this is not a decision that you would regret later, because you don't want to burn yourself out later by regretting the decisions that you make now, right? So really know yourself, know where your line is, know where your threshold is in terms of burnout, in terms of your deck strength, in terms of like what is tolerable for you, and make those decisions according to that. I do hope this video helped. I know it wasn't super long, but I wanted to talk a little bit about my perception of how these items are best used, and what you can do and how you can think about these items in the future. Hopefully this helps, and let me know if you have any other questions in the comments. I would love to hear them, and I really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.